Good evening, everybody. It is September 9th, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. Could I have a motion, please, concerning the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Could I have a similar motion, please, concerning the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any customers to be heard? Seeing none? Any recognitions, Mr. Schwant?
No.
Is there any old business that you're aware of, Mr. Schwant?
No.
Although I do believe Mr. Ogalla had a question that he'd like to raise under old business.
I believe it was last meeting, there was discussion about replacing the water lines 1 mile per year, and there's 20 to 30 miles that have to be replaced. That is concerning to me because of an incident that happened that you're familiar with that impacted me. And if we're going to spend $1 million now, what is it going to cost us in 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years to make that same replacement? And talk to how was the 1 mile per year came about, the rationale, and why we
Chris,
aren't a
I'll
little
have
bit more
Chris come up.
aggressive towards that.
And we actually have it on our
replacement
website, right? The water main asset management plan. And I mean, we did a lot of study on that. We had our budget committee involved in that. And it really is an acceleration of our our water main replacement program that we've had since the 80s. But at the rate that we were replacing water mains, we would have major problems in a decade with issues like the one you're referring to. I mean, water main breaks that cause damage to homes or businesses. So that's why we were looking at that. And Chris can give you some details. And for everyone at home or yourself, Commissioner Regala, we do have it on our website, the asset management plan that has a lot of the details and why we're looking at that. So,
Chris, would you like to add some information for John?
Sure. Yeah.
Identify yourself, please.
Yeah. Chris Knudsen, Water Division Manager. So last year, with the input of the Budget Committee, we actually was the first year that we came up with this water main asset management plan. And one of the things that we were concerned about was the projected infrastructure replacement needs associated with water main. And we recognize that we have about 30 miles of cast iron water main that was put in the 1950s and before. So much of that water main is coming due every year. About 8,000 to 10,000 feet needs to be replaced per year. So this year is actually the first year of the implemented water main asset management plan, and this year we'll do about 8,500 feet this year alone, and next year is projected to be even a little bit more than that. So 1 to 2 miles of replacement are expected per year to make that replacement, that entire replacement, in about 15 years. 15 to 20 years. We're expecting to get all of the cast iron replaced. And actually, in the first meeting in October, we're going to have an update to the water main asset management plan, at which time we'll report in detail on some of the progress and some of the challenges that lie ahead for water main.
And John should know that once we take care of the cast iron, then we move on to asbestos.
That's correct.
Concrete.
So one of the interesting things in that report is that over the next 15 to 20 years, we'll be working on cast iron replacement. But as that time period elapses, that asbestos concrete pipe is also decaying and will be coming due at about that time. So we'll have to immediately transition from cast iron to that AC pipe. So we've got some significant challenges ahead, but we feel that the plan addresses them fairly well. And so we're replacing about 1% of our distribution system every year. So you can think of it in an easy way to think about it is every 100 years you essentially, as a ratepayer, get new water main. So that's something that...
There are those of us who don't expect to be here at the end of that first cycle. I hope you understand that.
Yeah.
That 100-year thing ain't going to happen. But we've had these discussions at length, John, and Rolf is the one that's been really spearheading us moving forward with many of the same concerns that you voiced to me vis-a-vis, hey, look, this is going to take a long time to do, we better start getting on it. And I'm going to assume that virtually every city in the Midwest is faced with very similar infrastructure problems. We at least have been addressing those things on a continuing basis since the 1980s. So at least we're trying to do a little bit more.
But to make a point as well, I mean, you guys know that I don't believe that a mile and a half is enough, at least with the old stuff in the ground right now. So as we go through the budget cycle, and we'll talk to Chris and team as well, whether we could do more. This year and next year, we have plans already for those big projects. But going forward, I believe we need to look at doing this faster. And to John's point, it's going to get more and more expensive. And maybe we should look into bonding for this kind of stuff if it's possible at all. Do some bigger project if it's possible. The bad thing about water main replacement, of course, is that you rip open the roads, right? And all of a sudden you have 1, 2, 3, 4 miles of open roads, which are going to wreak havoc in the spring and in the summer. So, but it's definitely a big issue. And the other item that Chris and I have talked about as well is, of my personal biggest concern are the 5 remaining big water mains going underneath the railroad. We don't know what the status is of those. We know they're old. We know there's a lot of rail traffic on top of them, and that is one of the concerns I think we should look into more quickly than maybe even general water main replacement.
You know, that raises a very interesting question vis-a-vis the number of trains that go through on a regular basis through Fargo-Moorhead, and the weight of those trains, because the tanker cars that are going through are certainly a lot larger than the tanker cars that were in place and being used when those lines were put in. Is this something that we should have scoped or reviewed in the near term to see how much damage there may have been or may not have been? Maybe the concerns aren't well placed, but should we check it out to make sure that we know and can quantify how bad it may be?
Yeah, it's something we're looking at in this update that we're hoping to present in early October. We've looked at the cost to replace those 5, and those costs will be actually in the plan, and we're looking at lumping them together in 2017 as a large project. One of the things that we have been looking at over the past couple of years that we haven't done before is actually using drinking water revolving fund funding for water main replacement. So it's a little bit of a different style of bonding that allows us to save money over the long term in terms of water main replacement costs, because we can borrow the money to do the projects at a relatively low cost with an accelerated rate of replacement.
Are you aware, Chris, whether any jurisdictions along the main line of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe coming from the Bakken going east have looked into any cost share arrangement or studies relative to that very question about damage that may be imposed on underground services as a result of this? Because I watched the number of times that just the railroad crossings are changed in this community when they come through and they put in the new concrete, like they're doing on 11th Street right now, and and in other ones. And it seemed like every 3 years they're looking at doing something new at those crossings. I can only imagine what's going on underground.
Yeah, one of the things we can do in between actually replacing them is just do a condition assessment.
Yep.
That's an available tool that we haven't utilized very often in Moorhead, just because we haven't had a significant need. I think would be appropriate to investigate that further. I think that's something I'd be interested in doing, and we can.
I think with the increased rail traffic, we might want to look at that. And then, of course, if there are going to be any follow-up federal studies, there may be funding available to meet those needs.
That's a good point. I believe the fire department just received some funding for some additional hazmat things. So it's possible that type of funding exists. We haven't received anything like that in the past, but we'd be willing to investigate further.
Okay.
And the other item we have as well, I mean, we don't have a large team that can work on this, right? And we have to be aware that we may want to do 10 miles a year, all 5 crossings in 1 year, but there's only so many people we have actually on the team that can work on it or manage these deals. But it is a concern on the water side, and again, hopefully I'm wrong, but I've looked at some of the water pipe. I like water pipe.
I understand that.
I like water pipe.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. And some of the things we're seeing that coming out of the ground, I mean, the stuff is still working, obviously, and it's working fine, and we'll make sure they will work in the future. But there's some stuff that's disintegrating after 50, 60, 70 years. And I think it's our obligation going forward to the generations to come to make sure that they have water pipe that actually works.
In terms of those systems that run beneath the railroad tracks, do we know what they're comprised of?
We know the material. We know the material and the casing. So anytime a water main goes under a railroad track, there's also a protective casing.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's a far more complex process in order to get that work done anyway.
Not necessarily. With trenchless technologies, we just actually replaced one of the significant risk areas under a railroad this year as part of the Center Avenue project. We pulled a new pipe inside the existing pipe, which also has a casing. So essentially you have now a new pipe inside of a old pipe inside of a casing.
At least at that location.
At least at that location, correct.
What was the condition of the pipe that we pulled it through?
The pipe actually was fine. There were restrained joints. That was where we had several failures. So the bolts that hold those joints together had corroded. They weren't made of stainless steel. So they just corroded and we're essentially pulling apart in certain areas. So very concerning, very high risk area that we just completed as of today, actually. So that was a significant step, and that project wouldn't have gotten done if we hadn't escalated some of our budgetary replacement needs. So I think I think we're really addressing some of the high risk areas over the next couple of years, and I think we're being proactive. As I believe Ralph mentioned, it's a problem nationwide, and you see it on the news. If you want to find a news article, Los Angeles just experienced a very significant main break, and there's several others in Minnesota as well. St. Paul is definitely any city that grew a lot during the 1920s or 1950s is experiencing problems. St. Paul, Minneapolis, they both had several large main breaks that have caused significant interruptions.
Without imposing any further obligations on your already busy schedule, is this something you could look to and report back to us in the near term?
Yeah, not at next commission meeting, but the one following. That's when that water main replacement, we're going to just do an update on, like I said, the plan, and then some of the things we hope to look at.
I wonder if you don't want to focus also with what Rolf is concerned about, and those are those areas below the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
So that we can at least focus on some of that and find out from a quantification standpoint what our problems might be there. And I can't hardly assume that there wouldn't be.
Yeah. I mean, the pipes are breaking north and south of the railroad, so I would assume that they could also break underneath. So,
Yeah.
or pull apart underneath, I guess.
It's a very real possibility and something that we're also concerned about, and we're going to look at and investigate further.
So yeah, how many breaks have we had this year in general? Do you know about?
It's around 50.
150?
Yeah. So
again,
we've been in.
Those are just normal breaks, right?
Yeah. We haven't had any breaks over the last 5 years in the railroad vicinity. We certainly have had some in the past. Actually, within the last 10 years, I'm aware of at least
Of course,
two.
we've never had the level of traffic over those
That's a very
rails
good
that we
point.
have now either.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that answer your question, John?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's sort of exciting, and Rolf can tell you this because like he said, he really likes water lines. But the new technologies that are available to us really are amazing.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's really interesting is that over the past couple of years, the city actually hasn't done a lot of road replacement projects, and we've been able to really, I feel, creatively address some of our infrastructure challenges and do it in a really economical way so that we can get really the most bang for our buck. So I think that's going to be our strategy going forward. I'm not sure what the city's plans are. If they're doing large projects like they are next year, we're certainly happy to coordinate, but we have such large needs that we really have to be creative and do our replacement kind of regardless as to if the city is doing projects.
Thank you, Chris. That brings us down to the reports of the city council. Ms. Durand, what have you got to report to us?
Well, I have to report that last night we discussed the budget at City Council. We need to set a preliminary budget by the end of September, and questions came up as to whether or not we were going to, our transfer advisory committee, whether or not we would be able to come to some sort of an agreement by then. So September 19th, I told folks that we would have a very heavy schedule and a very hardcore working group, working meeting that day. And I, continue to express my cautious optimism that we will be able to come up with some sort of an agreement. We also got a handout from Wanda that she'd said that she had taken some reflection from Nancy, and I don't know, Bill, if you had some input on that, maybe Ralph, I'm not sure if it was you. But she had been speaking with Nancy, I know, and changed how the numbers looked on our budget sheet because of some concerns that you had expressed. So we have some different numbers that we're looking at now. And I also shared what Commissioner Ralph had shared with me in an email about the increased utility rates potentially coming after that latest meeting, Bill, that you had with MRES. So I think some council members may have been a little shocked at that.
I see that we have an item 8E to discuss the 2015 budget, another report. And if you have any other comments, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't sort of delve into that right now, since you've opened that particular door. And I too hope for.
Did I do that?
You may not have meant to, but maybe we should talk about some of those issues. And the other evening, I was watching the council's meeting, committee of the whole meeting. There was a couple of discussions that, I won't say concerned me, but there were a couple of discussions that I would like some answers to, budget-related discussions. Some questions were raised during that meeting relative to the streetlight utility fee and utility that may or may not be initiated by the city council as it moves forward. And Wanda made a comment, and Wanda's a financial director for the city, made a comment that she didn't know where those charges were coming from, and because she said she gets billings for so many streetlights of this size and the other size and so forth. She didn't know what the basis for those charges were. And so I'd like a clarification at this level so that Heidi can go back to the council, and maybe Nancy, if you could come up. How do we base this? And aren't these the same things that we've been having forever?
That, I believe that was clarified, and I believe, I'll let Nancy answer, but
Okay.
from the information we got last night, it sounded like you had had some conversations and Wanda had gotten some information that she was looking for.
Okay, so we have a sound basis on that, and you're getting all the information that you need from Moorhead Public Service.
Well, I don't want to speak for Wanda.
Okay.
She had gotten some information that she was looking for, but I think there still might be some information out there that she would like to have. But she does have a better, from what it sounded like, she's got a much better understanding of how the city is charged per pole and how all of that is factored together.
Okay.
I did meet with Wanda last week, and we did.
Can I ask you to identify yourself, Ms. Lund?
Nancy Lund, Admin and Finance Manager.
Thank you.
Sorry. I did speak with Wanda last week, and one of the topics of our discussion was street lighting, and she was trying to figure out how we arrive at those costs. So we went through a few pages of our electric rate study, which we use to develop all of our rates, our residential rates, our commercial rates, our street lighting rates are all part of that study. So I did provide her last week with 3 or 4 pages out of that showed the street lighting costs, and I think she was satisfied that we do base that on some actual costs. So,
Okay.
so I think that was remedied. I think the city council last night talked about it a little bit, and she was offered the copies of our cost of service study, rate study, to anyone that was interested in having those. So I think that has been answered.
So in terms of the exchange of information, you're providing all the information that's necessary for the city and the city staff to make its calculations.
Yes.
And we are getting all of the information that we need. Am I correct in that assumption?
For the most part, I guess. sometimes not getting information until after the city council has seen that information. So I'm not having the ability to input information before it's given to the city council.
And that brings up a question I have, because the numbers that were presented to the city council now, different discussion now, this is back to the transfer.
Okay?
When I saw the
It's all
numbers-
interrelated.
Yep, when I saw the numbers yesterday about the proposed budget from the city, for example, there's a proposed increase from last year to this year, from this year to next year of 460,000. I had not seen that number. And I don't know, had you seen the number that came out of the, I know we provided Wanda with the kilowatt hour information.
Right, I've provided kilowatt hour, the spreadsheets with that. I've updated some exemptions and things that are all associated with that, but I had not seen the numbers of what had happened internally in the accounting staff after I'd given that information. So I did not see that until this afternoon.
So we will indeed, Heidi, have a very interesting meeting on the 19th, because these numbers are higher than we expected, but again, it could be a calculation issue. But one of the items that when I talked to Nancy just before this meeting is, that surprised me, is that we have not seen these numbers before they were presented to council.
Correct.
So maybe that's one request we could make to city staff, to maybe run numbers like this by us before they're presented. I guess, of course, the expectation then could be once they're presented, they are fact, and they may or may not be. So that would be a good thing to request maybe
Does
city staff.
that pose any problems that you're aware of, Heidi?
I
I would hope that we are openly
Right.
exchanging information.
Exactly.
You know, what concerns me, and I looked at the charter, because I always go back to the charter, and I'm not an accountant, nor am I the brightest bulb. But at the same time, as I understand, when the budget is submitted, Moorhead Public Service is to provide a tentative budget to the city, which the city may then incorporate into their budgetary process. And I pose the question as to why there would be a difference in numbers. I mean, if we're providing a tentative budget and this is our number and this is what we're going to use for a rate, why do we have different numbers?
Without defending anyone.
And I've not looked at the numbers. I have no idea what Ralph was talking
Yeah.
about. I rarely do anyway, but I mean, I don't know what those numbers are.
I mean, Nancy talks to Wanda. I'm talking to Mike, during the budget process. The city has a pretty fluid process in which they don't have a budget committee. They do all of their discussions right out there in front. There is some reluctance from city staff to give us information ahead of time, because once we get the information, we may talk to our budget committee, things may be talked about. So I think their practice per se right now has been to say you can get it when the public gets it, either at the meeting or after that via the video or PowerPoints online. And, we've respected that. It's a little frustrating, and I think it's frustrating for the commission because we don't have input into that. All that being said, what you just mentioned, our budget process and their budget process can go on, without much input from either one via the charter. So we don't really concern ourselves too much with their budget at all, really, besides what's the general fund transfer.
What the end
gonna be,
result is.
so we can set our rates. And they are concerned about our preliminary budget so they can see, really, they don't really need to see much in ours, actually. And then the whole discussion about the charter and what it says about how the general fund transfer is determined. That's being debated right now. We have a committee meeting next week with the working group. We got a lot of work to do there. We've had 9 meetings. This is our 10th meeting in the past year. And I think there's a lot of things that are on the table that could be implemented. One, an agreement. I am looking forward to an agreement of some sort that settles.
We all are.
The next 3 years or so, because I think their budget process over the next couple of years is going to be challenging. We just learned that ours is going to be challenging, and we also have incentives out there for businesses that are looking at expanding that have a significant impact on our budget that we need to plan for. And if we don't have an agreement like we have, like what's happened in the past, if we get large increases from one year to the next, and we're offering these incentives, those incentives are funded totally by the ratepayers, and that's not what was intended when we did these incentives. So there's a number of things at play that I think is going to make the next couple of weeks interesting. And like was mentioned, the end of September, they have to set a levy. Now, all that being said, from the meeting last night, the city is looking at a budget that has some kind of a levy increase, a three-prong approach, some kind of a levy increase, some agreement on the transfer, and a streetlight utility. And you've heard about all those things. And the council has to decide what they're going to do, and they have to do it by the end of September. So I think that meeting next week is going to be very important.
You're talking about our budget meeting.
Well, the budget meeting, because I think there does have to be some kind of an agreement. Otherwise, I think the commission, look at the charter, they can say, here's the number. If you want to really get down to it, that's what you could do.
Let's not go there if we don't.
That's not what we want to
Yeah.
do. No.
Les?
Just the same as if we gave the city council our preliminary budget before we got it. I don't think it's even realistic to ask that we see theirs before, or even, before the city council members do. Their budget information's in the packet. It's public information. If it was given to us ahead of time, that would make it, in my mind at least, public information. And I just don't think that's good process.
But I don't think we can be in a situation where we believe number is X and outcomes number Y, and we don't know why that happened. There is a connection between the two, obviously.
Absolutely there is. And I believe that the group of four working on it has responsibilities there. But Nancy working with Wanda, Bill working with Mike have a large responsibility in this area to make sure that those things are. The issue becomes once it's in a public venue, then we all get kind of a little stuck.
We all get a little bit antsy too.
Well, I know they get antsy, but I think it's unrealistic to have the commission see it before the council sees it.
If I understood right, I'm not asking, personally, I don't know I didn't know about this until a few moments ago, but the question is, internally, I think that the public service staff and the city staff can exchange information and should be on a continuing and fluid basis.
We have two groups that are involved. We have the group of four, and we have the finance people.
The gang of four?
I wanted to say gang of four. I like saying that, but nobody else uses it, so.
Well, and that's why when Nancy says that internally they're not getting that information until after it goes through a more public process, that's disconcerting.
Yeah.
Because they should be getting that information on a fluid basis as a change. And we all understand.
And I think we ought to have Bill talk to Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Or somebody from the gang of four representing the city should, maybe carry our message. Because we don't want there to be any miscommunications. At the same time, we don't want somebody assuming that there's going to be a number that's not going to exist. But yeah, those lines of communication I think we're talking the same thing, that we don't want to go public until we have it. I agree. Heidi, did that answer your question, Les?
I didn't have a question. I made a comment.
Perfect. Heidi, do you have a question or comment?
No, I have a comment. I was just going to say that I agree that Les had a good comment, a good point, because that would be, it would be upsetting to council members if other outside, individuals had access to information before we did. We were given this information last night, so sometimes it's not even a part of the packet. We get it at the meeting that night. But in terms of lines of communication, it does seem like there is room for improvement there. That just even if we're just talking numbers, maybe we don't have to share the whole proposed budget with outside individuals, but we can at least maybe discuss some tentative numbers or what we're looking at or what we're maybe expecting. I don't think that is above and beyond, or that's too much to expect. I guess I do have a question. Nancy, Wanda told us last night that you two had talked about cleaning up or clarifying some numbers, and that the old number in our initially proposed budget was 173,000 increase, and now we're seeing it look more like 400,000 plus some. Maybe you want to explain, could you explain to the commissioners where, or how that was changed, or why that was changed? She said it was based on some suggestions that she'd received from MPS.
Yes, we did have a discussion last week pertaining to that. What the conversation started after the last council meeting, where they showed their first proposed budget, I believe, which showed an increase in the transfer from the electric utility of 173,000. And I asked for clarification on that number. And the clarification came back that the one-time increase, transfer increase of 541,000 was not included in the 173. So to get the total increase to the MPS budget, you had to add the 541 plus the 173. So that was a $700 and some thousand increase to MPS's proposed 2015 budget. So I asked to clarify that, and I said, maybe one way to do that would be to show that when the council last year approved the one-time increase of 541,000 in the 2014 budget, they needed to show that they had to recover that money again from somewhere else in the 2015 budget. And so last night's budget materials did show, you know, the decrease of the 541,000 coming from MPS in 2015. And then the new increase in the MPS budget of 461,000 instead. So originally it was shown as a $173,000 increase. Now it's being reflected as 460,000 plus.
But the original one would have been 760,000 total increase, actual increase, right?
Correct.
And then now we're at 461, and Heidi, to your question, I don't know where that number is coming from. So I know there's some 3% cost of living adjustment that were put on the numbers now, or?
Yeah, it appears that they've taken the concept that the working group has been looking at and added an annual inflation factor of 3% starting in 2014. So each year in 2014, 15, and 16 and 17, increase that by approximately 3% per year, which is an additional about 180,000 plus increase because of that inflation factor.
So there's a net increase of about 250 or 200,000 or 300,000 every year, plus there's a 3% on top of that.
Plus a 3% on top of that, so another.
So that's
yep.
why we get to number, I think proposed numbers for 15, 16, and 17 are 460, 382, and 577,000 a year. Those are big increases.
Those are big increases, and I don't know.
Well, I hope we're not, and I'll go along with what Les said, maybe we shouldn't know what's being discussed yet, but if anybody thinks that we're going to have a cost of living adjustment, I know one commissioner that would vote against it. I'll scream to the highest heavens about that, especially when we're faced, I mean, we have to base our operation on what it costs us to sell electricity and water. COLAs are a dangerous area to get into. I won't even let tenants negotiate leases with COLAs unless you've got a real good reason for it. That was my personal opinion, I'm sorry. But I think this underscores even more the need to internally share information and not let inappropriate assumptions get new life, because we've got some difficult things. And I've heard somebody alluding to some changes that we've got coming that we hadn't anticipated in terms of rates and other things that I hope we're going to discuss a bit as we go through this process.
Yeah, I think under the report, we could talk a little bit about that.
Well,
However,
we're into the report, so.
Well, I don't know in what order you want to do the.
Okay, well, let's answer the budgetary questions. Heidi, did you have a comment or a question?
Well, my last comment, thank you. My last comment was going to be that, you know, we still have a little bit of time to try to work out an agreement with, you know, our transfer group. And so this, you know, it could, and I'm optimistic that we can work to a conclusion that we can all live with, to a, you know, compromise. So you know, those numbers are there, but that's not what the transfer group has committed or has agreed to. So we have a big meeting on the 19th.
Yep.
I like your optimism.
I have one more comment to make. In the last couple of years, we have asked that this discussion start earlier. It has.
Yep.
And this is good, and we should be happy that the group of four is doing what it's doing. We should be happy that our staff is working with city staff and doing this sort of stuff. And we're not on the 9th of December making this discussion when the city council had just passed their thing last night. So I want to make sure that we got thumbs up so far. We're doing well. I want to make sure we all know that.
I agree with you. Rolf?
One more item on the budget, and I just want to put it out so we can start discussing it coming up. We as a group need to talk about Oakport and what our plans are on the annexation. There's going to be a big price tag attached to that, and we're going to have discussions with Red River here in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But we as a group, I think, need to talk about what our preferred approach is. We know we're not going to do it on January 1st, 15, when Oakport gets legally annexed to the city of Moorhead. We do have a policy that says that we follow suit. If there's an annexation, we follow suit with services. Water, of course, is already taken care of. That was taken care of 20 years ago. But on the electric side, there could be a big price tag, and we need to talk about that because it will impact the budget for next year. So the question for us is going to be, do we do it or not, and when do we do it? It's not a discussion for right now. I believe we need to put it on the agenda formally, but I think we should start talking about that.
That can probably be a subject for an entire meeting.
Yep.
And we have had difficulty scheduling a time to meet with representatives of Red River Valley Co-op. We had a preliminary meeting with them. But I agree with Rolf, that's something that we have to have an in-depth discussion because, yes, it is going to impact our budget at some point in 2015. So,
And then just to give an idea to everybody, I mean, the price tag with that between replacing equipment and buyout costs may be in the $10 to $15 million range. So we're not talking a little $500,000 expense over 20 years. We're talking about a big ticket item that we just need to discuss.
Les?
I know the city council uses the committee of a whole structure very well to address particular topics where action is not taken and cannot be taken, actually. Would this body be open to a committee of the whole meeting with the discussion of Oakport in some point in time? Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine with that. I
Because
mean,
you'd have to do the groundwork.
yeah, I mean, we're ready to discuss it whenever the commission would want to do a
I think it's a
working
great idea,
type
Les.
meeting. Yeah.
Because then we're saying right up front, this is a committee of the whole. We're not taking action tonight. This is a discussion operation. And I think it works pretty well with the city.
I'd be for that.
I'd be very happy to do so as well. I mean, it's just such a complex issue that
Absolutely.
might be a great opportunity to do
I
that.
bet you Casey could schedule it for us.
Well, it's all about Casey.
Always,
that's-
Casey can do that.
Can you schedule that for us, Casey? Yes. You were right.
Amazing.
Let's get that worked out. Okay,
Do you have any questions on that one?
Anything
Casey?
else on our-
Like when or?
Yeah, well, how soon do you guys want to meet?
Well, do you want to do it in place of one of these meetings where we just do like the council?
we may
does
want to
and-
have an extra meeting depending on what we've got coming up in the near
Right.
future.
We can
in
look
the
at
near
the
term.
schedule.
But at the
I'd
same,
recommend a separate meeting for
yeah,
it.
maybe you could even schedule that over a noon time and extend into the afternoon or the morning or whatever, if that would work.
Could do that.
Would it be best if we do that after we've met with our
I
friends
don't
at the
think you
co-op?
should, I don't think you should wait.
Let's do it.
I don't think we should wait either.
No.
We schedule it in October?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should start talking about it. We do have a policy. We're reviewing a policy here on financial strength. We can just review the policy so everybody's aware of what the policy is. And then we can put together some preliminary numbers looking at, what the committee's looking at and really how it's going to be paid for. Once we make that large expenditure,
Okay.
I think we can look at how the revenue is going to come back. And that's another reason why we need this agreement, is because Oakport is tied to, the reimbursement for Oakport is tied to that agreement as well.
Well, we try it for sometime in October, maybe you'd send out an email to everybody. Dave's not available tonight because he's ill, so we can,
Sure will.
okay, thank you, Casey.
You're welcome.
Okay, where do you want to go next on this discussion?
I don't know where we were.
We
I
were,
thought we were in AD.
yeah, we are.
Should we finish that up?
Yes. Well, and I
Well, you
think
wanted to
Bill's
talk-
got some information on,
Well, and I really don't have much information because the Finance Committee and the Board of MRES will be meeting tomorrow and the next day. We talked last meeting about a possible 9% increase from MRES. I did talk with Tom Heller about, some of the details. Of course, the Budget Committee or their Finance Committee and their board will have a lot of discussion about this. Because it did come up quickly, I'm definitely going to talk to them about that. Instead of 9%, it looks like 8.6, which isn't a whole lot different than 9%, but it sounds like a more
sounds like something an
definitive number.
engineer would come up with.
Yeah.
And a marketing person, yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
whether they phase some of that in,
Below
use
nine.
some of their reserves, that's going to be a discussion. So we really don't know what the number is yet. We do know that that's not the entire increase to us. I mean, that's 50% of our power supply, and WAPA is the other 50%. There is no proposed WAPA increase. They're adjusting some rates, but it won't be any increase. But if MRES is a 8.6, half of that would be a 4.3.
And that's in addition to Red Rock.
That would,
Right.
no, that would include the Red Rock of about 3.5. So instead of a 3.5, it's an 8.6. So it's not on top of that, it's in combination with. So that's good news. So I mean, we had projected for our increases about a 1.2 is what we were kind of looking at. That I don't believe had any transfer in it. So I mean, that's all up in the air there. Nancy, why don't you give the kind of the summary of that part? I don't want to say the wrong number.
Right now, with the information we've received preliminarily from MRES, that increase of 8.6% will equate, with a couple other changes, to about a 3 to 5% electric rate increase is what we'll be looking at. That includes the good news from WAPA being no increase from them, so that needs to come through for us. And those 3 to 5% increases are with no increase in city transfer. So, if you were going to add the council's request on top of that, you'd be looking at another probably 1.5% to 2% on top of our 3 to 5 to accommodate the city transfer request. So it's all preliminary numbers. The biggest numbers we work with, of course, are our purchase power in the city transfer. That makes up the bulk of our spending. And the staff will begin looking at projects and capital expenditures and everything over the next couple of weeks. And we'll engage the budget committee to take a look at that. But it's hard to tell where we're going to be until we firm up those first two big numbers.
And then those numbers would not include any increase on our part. So if we come up with water main replacement or whatever, that's not included at all in that, right?
On the water side, we do allocate about 1.5 million for water main replacement, and on the water side, we're looking at 5% rate increases for the next several years to fund that. So we are at that range of about 1.5 million a year. Commissioner Regala, for your information, that number used to be in the $300,000 to $400,000 annually. So what we used to spend on water main replacement, and we're up to about the 1.5 average.
Well,
now.
not only have you increased it, but those costs have increased as well.
Costs have increased, yeah. And the 5% on the water side will also cover our, high service pumping station that we're in the process of redoing in this year and next year too.
With these projected increases, are we anticipating any concerns from our larger customers?
Always concerns from our large customers. The good news is, and it's not much of a defense, but some of the increases that we're seeing that are coming from our power suppliers are also increases that other power suppliers are seeing as well. So, rising tide raises all ships, that old saying. That's what's happening to all the rates. And so we don't know for sure relatively if we're going up faster or at the same pace or slower than other utilities. Dennis keeps track of those and gives a report. I mean, it's a couple times a year now. And we've got a graph under our other agenda item here on our rates compared with Excel. So we are comparing those, but they're seeing cost increases as well. We just don't know how much. We want to keep watching that, make sure we stay competitive.
But they will not have the transmission charge, right? Because theirs is already built in. Is that correct? The
They may have
RES charge that we have coming?
Which one are you talking about now?
The RES charge that we have coming, the big increase for next year, they already have that, right? Because they're paying for the transmission costs already?
And you're talking about Excel?
Excel.
Oh, they won't see that increase at all, but they will see other increases. You see the transmission that's going up along I-94 down to the cities. They're a major player in that one, so there'll be increases there. I know Minn Kota just completed a transmission line from the center of North Dakota to Grand Forks, and those, get put into rates just like we put our costs into rates. So there's transmission projects all over the region, and all the rates are elevating. It's just some are ahead of others. So that's a long explanation. The transmission rate impacts are probably not done. This is probably not the end of them. This is just one significant one because WAPA went into the Southwest Power Pool. And so there's cost shifts that are going on right now, and MRES is looking at how we're going to fund those.
Okay.
And there are winners and there's losers whenever there's a change in the equilibrium of transmission or power supply or those types of things.
I mean, could we buffer, I know RES is thinking about, could we buffer some of our increases with reserves? I know we're low.
Well, the other agenda item on the agenda is the policy on financial strength. And of course, we need to watch, well, that policy is what we report to Moody's. We've got a good bond rating right now, and we want to keep that. I would think that you could definitely look at that, especially since you've got large customers that are looking at expanding and they're concerned about our rates. Moody's would say that's certainly a reason why you would, slow down your accumulation of reserves. So, I mean, you could look at that. Nancy can run some scenarios. The budget committee can look at those. But it's definitely something the MRAS is going to look at as well. But I always look at, I mean, it's all a complicated formula here when we get to this point. And that financial strength policy is a good one to look at. So we should look at that a little bit.
Okay.
And she's got some graphs on that too, Nancy does. Good questions, though.
Do you have a question, John?
We're still discussing AE.
Yes. Well, Heidi sort of opened that door, like I said, when she started talking about the budget. So we went down to 8E, but yeah, we're still on the budget.
Yeah.
On page 2, the last item, you have 8,378,378 noted. How is that number?
And what you're looking at there is under the electric division transfers to the city of Moorhead. And that's the total, so that includes capital improvement, which is typically 5% of our gross revenues. And then it also includes the general fund, which can be up to 20% of our gross revenues. And right now it's about at 17%. So it's just, and then there's economic development, which is like 50,000. And it seems like I'm missing one. But I think that's it, isn't it?
General fund, economic development, capital improvement.
Yeah. And that's what gets the total of over 8 million.
That wouldn't be the numbers already listed above then of the 6,765,000 and the budgeted capital improvement 1,008,000 and then $50,000 for the economic development fund. If it's those three numbers, that's more than 8,000,003.
Okay, help me out here, Nancy.
It should be the 5.9 million under the first one, the general fund. It should be the 5.9 million, the 1,847, and the 50. If it doesn't foot up, I apologize, but it should be those numbers, the 5,980, 1,847, and 50,
They're probably $70,000 off.
very possibly.
Oh, let's not go there again.
Yeah. I seem to be saying the wrong things today.
Last time we sent him on a trip.
Did that answer your question?
I was looking, instead of the 5.9, I was looking at the 6.7 number,
Okay.
the 6,765,000,
Oh, the new one.
the new
Oh,
one
okay.
here for it, so thank you.
And that's for 2015? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we did put a lot of those numbers in there in those paragraphs, just so that you could do what you're doing and kind of looking through and understanding what they are and where they're coming from. And the budget committee and the city's group is looking at those numbers as well. And that's where they're trying to come up with a formula and an agreement going forward. And we really would like to get that done earlier rather than later, so we don't get to December.
Well, and like
that
Les,
part.
Les made a very valid point. We are early in the discussion, even
Right.
though the clock is ticking.
Yeah,
But-
and
but,
it ticks pretty fast at this point of the year.
Any further
But-
comments
But
on?
John is right, the numbers are not adding up to 8.3.
And that's why we have Nancy here. Nancy, what?
I'll check the numbers because it
Yeah.
should be the total of, and then these were 2014 budgeted numbers, the 5.980 million, the 1.847 million, the 2014 budget numbers, and the 50,000. So we haven't totaled up the 2015 numbers anywhere yet.
Yeah. This almost looks like a 2015 number, so let's make sure the numbers are correct for the 14. But the three, John is right, the three don't
Okay.
add up. 7, 8, yeah.
Okay, I'll double check that and report back.
Yeah, good.
Anything further under this particular matter?
I move to accept 8E.
Thank you, Les. Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. Heidi, did you cover everything you wanted to say on behalf of the city council? Thank you. Item 8D is to the report on the financial strength.
This one, and we talked about it just a little bit earlier, is a policy that was developed back in 2012 in order to just follow the methodology of Moody's Investor Service when it came to rating our bonds. And they spent a lot of time working on the methodology, and it was a very good methodology. We actually built this policy out of that and then made plans to hit the targets in our policy. We took that to Moody's, and we actually had pretty good financials, good operation. We made a presentation to them. We showed them our policy. They loved it. They should, because it was basically what they gave us to look at. And they actually gave us a bond rating increase that time. Maintaining that bond rating is an important thing. So when we go back to them the next time we go for our bonds, they will look at how we're doing on this policy. So, I mean, we've had some setbacks because the last few years, have been difficult budget years for both the city and for MPS. And so we've not made our targets for our reserves, and now we're talking about using the reserves again to maybe hold down some rates, which is perfectly fine to do that. However, at some point we will have to move those reserves up. So the policy has a lot of details, and I gave a little bit of an intro. Nancy may want to add a little bit, and then we'll just open up for questions. This is intended to be just kind of a education on the policy and a review of the policy. We weren't intending on changing the policy at this time. Nancy, do you want to add anything?
I can add a little bit there, so when we developed this policy, the intent of it was definitely to increase our bond rating, and we did accomplish that at the time, and so now the challenge for us is to continue to meet those guidelines that we've set forth in this. Doing our cost of service studies on a regular recurring basis for both the electric and the water utilities is important. Looking at the amount of bonding we do versus cash payment for our capital projects, that's important too, to make sure we don't overload ourselves too much with too much debt. So we need to make sure we're raising our rates enough to accommodate and keep those ratios in perspective and within our policy. So we look at those, and then I just wanted to note that the two areas that are the biggest challenge for MPS in this policy are our competitiveness, you know, to maintain our current bond rating. We would like to be, or Moody's would like us to be, between 25 and 7.5% below regional utilities. So that's our challenge. We've been below before, but we're getting tighter on our competitiveness. And that's displayed in one of the two graphs that's accompanied there. So one where you see a comparison between MPS and Excel North Dakota, where if you look back in 2003, 10 years ago, we were very competitive with that utility, and now we've gotten to the point where our rates are slightly above Excel North Dakota. And as we look at competition and we look at where a business entity might settle, we choose them as our competitor because it's either going to be probably on the Minnesota side or the North Dakota side. So we don't spend as much time comparing with Excel Minnesota because they're not the competition. And so that's our challenge on there, trying to keep our rates at least 7.5% below our competition. The other area that we need to work on, continue to work on, is our liquidity or the balance in our reserves. And we started that process in 2012. We've gone in cycles back to 2004, 5, and 6. We'd drawn our reserves down very significantly, paid a lot of cash out for a lot of projects, and since 2007 have been trying to get those reserves developed. In 2012, the question was, well, we're where our old policy says, what do we do now? And that's where we look to Moody's for some guidance as to, you know, how they're going to rate reserves and where they think we should be. So they're our guideline for that. In 2012, we had hoped to, by 2015, meet the reserve levels that the Budget Committee helped us set, and we've had a few setbacks since then. 2012, we had a poor year. 2013, it looks like we had a good increase, if you're looking at the reserves, but it's a little deceptive there because those reserves were actually the delay of the power plant demolition. So that's why you see 2014 projection going back down again, because we'll be using those power plant monies that were still available at the end of 2013. So it could be part of the budget discussion as we engage the Budget Committee to take a look at where they want to be, but we have not made significant gains in our reserve policy since we've implemented this policy in 2012.
If I can pose a question, and Heidi, I'd welcome your input in this too, and Les, who just got off the EDA Commission, and John, who's just going back on the EDA. As I look at the competitiveness graph that you have in front of us for September 9th, 2014, it's rather clear that we have changed the competitive nature of Moorhead Public Services residential rates. And again, when I was listening to a recent council meeting, somebody asked a question, well, have we seen these graphs lately from public service? Oh, we do them at least once a year when we do our rate hearing, but we also have been doing them on a more frequent basis. And the city manager at that time said, we're in the ballpark. Now, in the past, the EDA had done studies on why is it better to live in Moorhead kind of a thing, and where are we from a competitive standpoint? And I've always been under the assumption that Moorhead was rather proud of the fact that we were in that position that we were back in 2003, and could claim that, yes, we may have higher taxes but in some aspects, but at the same time we have the lowest utility rates in the area. And we no longer have that. And has the council ever, because I've asked this before, ever taken a position relative to where they want us to be from an economic development standpoint? Or has the EDA ever said, you know, we want to be competitive, not in the ballpark, because I don't think that's where we should be. I think we should be competitive, and I think we should be lower. Are you aware of any positions taken? I mean, does the council want us to be just on a par with these other communities who are sort of have other incentives that we cannot bring to the table because we're in Minnesota? I mean, it's really quite a switch to us from a marketing standpoint. I mean, Les?
speaking from my time on Economic Development Authority and going to the Moorhead Business Association meetings, there have not been really much discussion on the rates because they are competitive. What I do hear, though, is Moorhead lights are on when Fargo loses theirs. And if you're a business operation, you need power. That thing goes down. Even if it's down for a few seconds, it may take you up to an hour to recover. So the comments that I hear are more related to the reliability of our power than it is anything doing with the rates. So the rates must be competitive.
Okay, well, yeah, well, the rates are competitive.
Right, but from their perspective,
Okay.
they're looking at it as a competitive rate, but it's more reliable.
And I agree with you that I've had friends who are in business operations in Fargo who said that they wish they had the same level of reliability that we have, because our staff does a heck of a job in terms of reliability. Ralph?
I had the power out for the first time in years in my neighborhood this week, and I am going to declare open season on squirrels.
I think we already did that.
Did we?
Yeah.
We'll do it again. Sorry.
We kill an awful lot of squirrels.
But to your point, absolutely. I mean, there's one thing with squirrels, but we do take care of our stuff, right? The question is, does that give us the ability to charge a little bit more? I agree with you on in the ballpark is not good enough, or should we be competitive, saying, yeah, the water's better and electricity is on more often or all the time, or almost all the time, and that comes with a lower price tag on top of it. And we do know on the water side we're not competitive, right, Chris? We are higher than others in the region, and we do know that water is, for at least one of our big customers, a big issue because they use a lot of it.
And I know from a couple of private sources in the plumbing business that those instant water heaters, the Renai-type water heaters, are not even sold in one of the communities in the metro because of the quality of water. And I mean, we have a lot to be proud about. Like you say, Chris's crew produces a great water product. It's award-winning. And from an electricity standpoint, I'd compare us to anybody in the metro, and then some. Bill?
Looking at that graph, the competitiveness graph, and thinking about the policy, and the policies provide, some very good guidelines for our strategic directions that we want to be in. One thing to think about, and I bring this up occasionally, one is transmission, and we're getting some impacts in there, and I kind of said those are somewhat spread out throughout the area, so all the power suppliers are affected by that. One thing that the other ones are not affected by that we are, and it is significant, is that Western area power that we get, that 50% of our power that comes from the federal hydro dams, which is, less expensive energy, significant less expensive energy, but it's capped, and so we will no longer get 50%, in 5 years or 10 years. It'll be less than that, and so a larger and larger portion is going to be Missouri River Energy Services, which is more expensive. And so just because of that issue alone, our competitiveness is going to be impacted. So if we're going to try and stay 7.5% to, what'd you say, 25, below the region, what's fighting against us is our less and less WAPA power, because as we grow, and we hope to grow, our rates are going to have to go up because we've got a higher mix of higher expensive or more expensive energy. And so that's a easy one to see coming. So when I look at this graph and I see, and that's happened over the last 10 years, from 2003 to 2014, we've gone from, probably 60% WAPA and 40% MRES to 50-50. And so that's had some impact on our rates. It's just going to happen. So our competitiveness is being whittled away. And so we have to come up with other areas to hold the line in order to stay competitive.
Dan? Any other questions? John?
Just for clarification for me, on the way this is written, it says bond rating of a AAA is 25% to 7.5% below?
Below.
That is
Yes,
correct?
Yep, that's correct,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. And on your chart here, you have the cash total for public service, but do you have offhand what the electricity liquidity is and the water liquidity is to meet the goal of 170 to 180?
Do I have the individuals for each? Yeah, I do. I don't have them with me right now.
Okay, all
But,
right.
yep, I'll get
Okay,
those for
all
you,
right.
John.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the last one was that it says here that the target policy was moved from 2015 to 2019. Could you give an explanation why that happened?
Correct. Well, as costs go up or projects come along, we make those choices on how much we want to raise the rates. We know that we're going to have to continue to raise rates slightly all the time to increase those reserves, and we do that, we factor it in, and then I think we have projects that come up during the year that we spend those extra reserves on instead. So it's those between budget period expenditures that come up.
And you have to
Right.
understand, in terms of the reserves, John, we are also self-insured with a lot of our infrastructure, so that if we have a devastating storm or whatever, that comes right out of our reserves or has to be bonded for.
Like Bill said, this is critical for our moving street.
Yep, it is critical. And, you know, and we, in the past, we have used reserves from time to time as a rate stabilization process so that we don't have shock to our customers in terms of rate increases. One of the other comments that was made by certain council members was to the extent that they didn't understand the various carve-outs when we come to determining how much the transfer is for there are certain things like newly annexed areas that they don't take the transfer on and some things like that. Do we have the documentation available so that we can, so those members of the council can rest assured that we're only taking things off the table that we agreed to take off the table jointly?
The
We
only
do-
two, yeah, I'll start on that one. The only two carve-outs that matter are, and we've talked about both of them tonight, is service territory,
Newly annexed areas. Yep.
newly annexed areas, and economic development. So those are the only two carve-outs,
That still exist?
well, that really exist formally in documentation that the council has a resolution on one and an ordinance on the other. The other carve-outs were understandings, if you will, when we did the generator, where staffs have agreed that those would be carved out. Like when we did the 10 megawatt generator, it didn't make sense for us to pay a transfer on the lease payments from MRES because it would have made a 22% transfer on that would have made the project unjustifiable. And the money is staying in the same community, so it just wouldn't have made sense. So that was an understanding between the council, the commission, and staffs without any agreement. That one is down the road, so it's not an issue. And really, when the council and the commission agree on a set number every year, the carve-outs don't matter because they aren't implemented.
But if those carve-outs come into part of the discussion in terms of how much net revenue is available, then it does matter in terms of getting to the number.
And it's a complicated way
Process.
of looking at it. And that's why we need some sort of an agreement out of the group of four, especially when we've got, businesses expanding. And we've got two that are, using our economic development incentives, and we're right on the verge of deciding whether or not we serve electricity to Oakport.
Okay.
So, and that's why we need some, like our policy does, it gives us some guidelines on how we're going to treat things, and we need the same thing in an agreement.
And of course, the charter specifically allows us to enter into agreements with the city council and so forth to do those types of things. We can agree back and forth. Heidi, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that the council has seen those carve-outs. Wanda's given us numbers that detail exemptions.
So everybody understands the reason why they exist.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah. We-
At one point they didn't, and I just want to make
Right,
sure that
yeah. But we've all seen
everything's
those.
on the table.
Yeah, we've all seen those now, and when questions come up, Wanda's able to answer why those are exempt and how long they are exempt for.
Great.
And this has helped that we had a bunch of different ones, but now we only have economic development or annexation left. So if there's anything else, it's gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything else, they really probably should be in an appendix in this agreement. Because I would guess that you would attach those to that ordinance and that resolution to this agreement saying, these are the only two carve-outs.
Okay. Very good. Anything further for Nancy on this subject? Anything further we have to discuss on this policy?
You know, just, I keep going back to that reserve history graph that Nancy put together, and just wondering if there's any other questions on that. And one thing that isn't on the graph that probably should be is the target. You know, and the target is the 170 days on the bottom. And if you look from 2011 to 2015 projected, we're basically going sideways for 4 years in a row. And that is the kind of thing that Moody's will look at and say, so why are you going sideways? And if we look back at those 4 years, we can kind of see why we were going sideways. And that's why we're discussing the
Well,
issues that we're
obviously,
discussing.
they also recognize that there are reasons why you may go sideways.
Well, yeah, but they're going to want a good answer on why you're going sideways. Because you've made a plan, now how'd you do it implementing your plan? So,
Okay. Pardon?
Keeping rates down won't be.
No, well, that probably would
Right.
not, and he was just saying that keeping rates low may not be
right.
an acceptable reason, but at the same time,
Well, you know, and you can see from the policy, they're balancing all those things. So you got to have competitive rates, you have to have reserves. So, I mean, they're going to look at the transfer and say, and they always do, they say, both in the cities and our Moody's reports, it says that's pretty good sized, you know. And the last time that we got our rating increase, I knew that was going to be a big issue, and I preempted them and said, you know, I know you're going to bring up the fact that the transfer is high, but our rates are competitive. And that did kind of neutralize it. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but you see the graphs, our rates are getting less and less competitive all the time. So we've got to deal with that.
okay. Anything further? Could I have a motion regarding this matter?
I move to accept 8D.
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. That brings us, we're not going into closed session this evening.
However, we got B and C to do. I thought you were working your way upward.
Well, I was sort of going in that same general direction. Do the members of the Public Service Commission have anything to report?
No, I don't.
Okay. That took care of B.
Wait, I have one.
I'll bet you do. Is this about pipes again?
This is not about pipes.
Okay.
No, this is about, no, not at all. I had a customer of ours approach me yesterday saying, you know, with all the discussion with the governor and the diversion and whatever, should we let people know that it is very important that Fargo and Moorhead and North Dakota Minnesota work together on the water supply side, so that we realize we don't want to go at war with anybody here because we have other fish to fry, no pun intended here. We work on a lower project here, getting the water maybe over here. So the question was asked: should this body say, hey, you know, parties, remember we have other things to worry about as well. It's not just water diversion. If you throw sand in other people's faces, make sure that we do it nicely because we have other things to worry about. Just want to throw that out.
Well, and obviously, we've all participated in ongoing discussions on the water supply issue going back for as long as I've been here. And you're right, we do have some major issues when it comes to supply, and we do want to cooperate with our friends to the west, and I think we have. Yeah, a very, very good, very valid point. Anything further? Okay. Any, General Manager, did you have anything further that you wanted to report?
Just one.
Because if we're going back on B and C, I want to make sure that we...
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. And 2 commissioners came up this evening, so 2 out of 4 commissioners that are here today brought up something that they got in the mail for water line service insurance. And I end up advertising for this company all the time. I might as well use their name, but it's Home Serve USA Repair Management Corporation, and they blanket, I'm sure, our community and other communities with these letters. And what they will do is they'll come in and they say they will come in and fix your water service if it's damaged, you know, whatever happens to it fails. and up to $6,000, I believe. And then, and for the insurance, they'll do that for $65 a year, 66. And we're not endorsing this, so we want everybody at home to understand that we don't endorse this, and it's up for them to decide whether or not they want to buy insurance. But at one point earlier on, they actually put our name in on these letters. So it really did look like an endorsement for Moorhead Public Service, and some people may have paid the $66 a year in order to get that because they think Moorhead Public Service is saying I should. Well, Moorhead Public Service is not saying that you should, and they should determine.
We are neutral.
We are neutral, and they should determine for themselves if they want, insurance for their water line. Chris could probably tell you, I mean, it does happen occasionally, but not very often. So you're getting an insurance policy that, chances are you may not ever collect on it.
Well, since we're neutral, we're either going to tell people to get it or not to get it. That'll be a decision they can make. But
Yeah.
anything further? John?
Maybe Bill can help me with this, but I'm kind of, with being new, I'm trying to keep track of all the potential issues coming towards more public service. And I've got a list of 10 that I think I've noted.
All right.
That can change or create increases in rates. And I'm wondering if you can put something together for me that you're aware of here, because the notes I have is we're looking at an increase for reserves to meet the strategic plan. We're looking for increases to meet the transmission lines. We're looking at increases to meet the water asset management plan. We're looking to increase to meet the city request. We're looking for increases for Oakport. We're looking for increases potentially for the annual water line replacement. We're looking potentially at increases in wages because there is the negotiations is starting shortly. We're looking at the impact of the coal plant with the EPA. We're looking at, you mentioned power cost increases in general, and then you had mentioned so far the incentives that are going to be going in place that are going to impact our revenues. So that's, so far in the last 2 meetings, that's the items that I have picked up on. So if you have any additional ones here that or I would be made aware of, because that's a lot.
If I might say, John, in the 2 short meetings that you've been able to attend so far in your short tenure here, you've really picked up on exactly what it is we've been talking about for quite a while. So, yes, those are all issues that we're facing, and we've discussed them, and we continue to discuss them on a regular basis. But yeah, I think that would be a good idea for you to put together. I'm not going to say a primer because I think he's already got the primer, but it's something that pretty much says, these are the issues that are facing us, and they're huge issues. And
No, your number 6 was what? Water. It was something to do with water.
Well, we have the
Asset management.
replacement plan of 1.5 million, and if we have discussed earlier the potential of maybe accelerating that would be a potential increased or cost that would have to be absorbed somehow.
And what was your 10?
Number 10 was the incentives that we you mentioned
economic
earlier.
development.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more
Yep.
out there, but
Yep.
that's just,
And keep in mind that as you go through this process, that the things that impact the water rates are separate from the items that impact the electric rates, and they're 2 separate funds, and we operate them as 2 separate funds. And but yes, there are market forces out there far beyond our control, in addition to the local forces that we have to deal with. And but that's a pretty good handle.
and yes, I don't care if it's water or electricity, it's increases to our citizens
Right. Right.
And our businesses.
and business.
Absolutely. Anything further, anybody? I think we've gone through everything. Does the parliamentarian agree with me? Okay. That having been said, our upcoming meetings on September 23rd, we'll again meet, as well as on October 14th, and there are some other opportunities for MRES meetings and so forth, or MPS-related meetings. And I believe that we'll be meeting as a subcommittee shortly with Red River Valley Co-op to discuss that. And of course, the gang of four will be, group of four will be meeting shortly.
And the committee of the whole.
And the committee of the whole, yes. And we wish that group of four well. And we like their optimism. That having been said, we are adjourned.